Hey guys. Okay. So this is going to be reasoning. So we are going to review the fallacies that we've learned so far. You did chapter 26, 27, and 28. We talked about the post hoc ergo propter hoc and the proof by lack of evidence. So let's review. So the red herring, let's start from there. The one that we did so long ago. These are avoiding the question fallacies. The red herring introduces an irrelevant point by avoiding the question at the beginning of the argument. So ad hominem, let's go into, it attacks the character or the person's motive instead of disproving the argument. And then special pleading, that is the one that it's the unjustified exception. Make an exception for the reason that they did it needs this this special exception, so that goes with special pleading. And next is ad hominem. No, we did that one. That one attacks character and motive instead of the argument. Let's go to genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy is where you condemn an argument from its origins, where it began, how it began, who began it. So from the very beginning of it, that there's a problem with the beginning, therefore it can't be valid. So that's genetic fallacy. Okay, tu quoque. The U2, dismissing someone's point on an issue because they are inconsistent in that very thing. Faulty appeal to authority. This is an appeal to someone who has no special knowledge in the area being discussed. They're an authority, but they're not an authority in this particular area. All right, appeal to the people. This is claiming a viewpoint is correct because many people believe it. This is true because all these people are true, therefore it must be true. People say it's true, therefore it must be true. All right, let's go straw man. This is changing or exaggerating an opponent's position just to make it easier to refute, to tear down. All right, let's see. Circular reasoning. So this is when you restate the point of an argument just using different words. So that is the example in our book gives us that if Q, let's see, if Q is true, let me make sure I say this right. Let me find that. Well, I thought I had that written down. But let's see, if Q is true, P is true, and if P is true, Q is true. So it just kind of restates it into a another way to say it, even though you're saying the same thing. Here, let me look that because I know I wrote that somewhere. Yes, oh, there it is. There it is. Okay, so P is true because Q is true, and Q is true because P is Q. So you're just, it's that going in a circle. This is true because this is true, and then you flip it, and this is true because this is true. So, okay, let's go to that circular reasoning. So let's go to equivocation. So this is when we change the actual meaning of a word. If a word, depending on the context, can be used a different way, that's during the middle of that argument that will be used in its other way, other meaning. And our brain typically picks up on that. We just realize that something's off a little bit. Okay, let's see. Loaded question. Loaded question is two questions in one, but one is hidden in that. And a great examples in our book is when the attorney is asking the witness a question, and he's actually leading him down a path that he doesn't want to go, but he's asking him loaded questions. Okay, slippery slope. It assumes if we take one step, if we take this step, nothing will stop us from taking a series of other steps. That, oh, if we do this, all of this is going to happen. You know, if we do A, B, C, and D are going to happen if we take that step. It's a slippery slope. Okay, part to whole. This is saying that what is true of the part must also be true of the whole thing together. And then the other one, whole to part, is what is true of the whole must also be true of each of its parts. So you can use those in, I think I've used the basketball team. So if we say, you know, the Rockets are an amazing team. Everyone's great. Well, if the whole team is doing really well, they have a winning season, that's the whole. Doesn't mean every one of their players are phenomenal. And then if you had one or two players on it that made the team whole, this could be part to whole, and you say the Houston Rockets as a whole are awesome, but they only actually have two players that are good, you're assuming that just because those two players are good, the whole must be true of everybody, and that is not. So part to whole, whole to part, they kind of go together. And then either or, when someone insists that we must choose between only two things, when in fact there are more alternatives, that's the either or fallacy. Now there are times that it is either or, but if it's a fallacy in argument in when you're debating, if you kind of point them to a way that they feel that there is only those two options, but there is there's not. There are actually more alternatives, but you are leading them to think that. Okay, so generalization. This takes a sample from a class of things using the characteristics of that sample, and it says something from that class. So nothing is certain, and then it can either be a strong or a weak generalization. And we talked about challenge Ayers with geography. So we can make a generalization that a strong one is all challenge Ayers study geography, because we know they do. Now, however, whatever depth they take that study into, they could just go real lightly. It doesn't make them a geography wizard. Or they could take it really deeply, and it could make them a wizard. So a weak one would be all challenge Ayers are geography wizards, and that's not true. That would be a weak generalization. We know that challenge Ayers study geography, and we can make a generalization about that they all study, but not that they are all experts in it. And then a hasty generalization is when we generalize upon too small or a poor sample of that class. So it's either too small of a sample, some characteristics about it, or it's not representative of that group. And we talked about the eating habits of Italians. If you only study, there's Italians all over the world. If you're talking about bloodline, and we study the only American Italians and what they eat, they could be very different than what they actually eat in Italy, or if an Italian, lived in France. So it would be too small of a sample for the part of the whole. You're only taking, so you have this big group of Italians, and we're going to take this small section of them, and based on what they eat, what Italians eat in general, that would be a hasty generalization. Okay, so the next one is analogy, and this is when we compare two items with each other. So they have similarities. They're different, but they share a similarity. Let's say that. And then it can either be a strong analogy or a weak analogy. Weak analogy is when items compared are major, but their similarities are minor. And I have this on 126 in my book as the example, and it's a car example. And Clyde says, our new car is a blue Ford. It has a 15-gallon gas tank, 5 cup holders, and a sunroof, and it drives really fast. And then Bert says, hey, our car also has a 15-gallon gas tank, 5 cup holders, and a sunroof. I bet it drives fast too. So they are similar. They're being a car, and they have these minor differences, these minor similarities, but none of these things talk about how fast a car goes. So those are minor, when they would actually be comparing a major thing, how fast they drive, the engine. Cup holders have nothing to do with that. So that would be a weak analogy. Okay, so let's go to this last week's post hoc ergo propter hoc. So that is, that's a Latin phrase. Did y'all catch what it was? So we know post, after, hoc, this, after this, ergo, therefore, because, propter hoc, because of this. So after this, therefore, because of this. So what that means is when we conclude that A happened, since A happened before B, A must have caused B. And an example they gave us in our book was a weatherman. So the weatherman said it was really cold this day, and he said it's actually going to be warmer tomorrow, and then it's warmer tomorrow. A fallacy comes, now this is kind of ridiculous, but it gets the point across. A fallacy would come when going, oh, the weatherman made the weather warm up. Okay, so because A happened before B, A must have caused B. So you typically have to have more evidence in that. You have to have more to go on. That's a lot of assumption to think that caused that. And people can draw some wild connections between things that normally would appear unrelated. But it's this fallacy of post hoc ergo propter hoc. Okay, and that's a mouthful. But I thought it was funny that then when they say apparently was given way back in Latin was popular among fallacy detectives, and the name is stuck, so we didn't change it because it is a mouthful. But just remember that we can't automatically conclude that because this happened before this, that A causes B. You have to have, we typically have to find out a bit more. Now, it can cause it, yes, but if it's not causing it, that's where the fallacy comes in. And then proof of lack of evidence. This where it shifts the burden of proof on the accused. Okay, so if I say you're guilty, the fallacy comes when it says you're guilty because you can't prove you're not. Where this country, even in our legal system, the burden of proof is on the accuser. So if I accuse you of being guilty, I have to prove that you are. You don't have to prove that you're not guilty. The burden of proof lies on the accuser. It's when it is a fallacy is when you're shifting the burden to the accused, on the accused. That, well, you can't prove you're not, so you are. Let's see. So it's in the book on lesson 28, it says, this is a fallacy when it's claiming something is true simply because nobody has yet given any evidence to the contrary. So it becomes a fallacy because you're shifting the burden of proof to the accuser. That, well, this has to be true because no one's denied it or no one's proven that it's not. So that's proof by lack of evidence. Okay, so we have so many fallacies. So this was the last of our statistical ones. We're getting into propaganda, and that you'll have seen a lot of that in World War II. There was a lot of that going on in the European countries, everywhere. But it's just, well, you're going to read what it is. But governments use that, especially not free governments, communist governments. They produce this to form people's opinions, and it happens all over. So I really want you looking for that one. Propaganda, appeal to fear, that goes on in our times as well, and then appeal to pity. So those are your three fallacies in our next three chapters. You're going to read chapter 29, chapter 30, and then chapter 31. On those three, complete your exercises. And again, like I said, look in the newspaper, especially with what we got going on right now about COVID-19, that you could see some of this going on. So kind of note those and being able to recognize those. Okay, that's it. We have one more bit. Well, I have Latin left to go, so I don't know what order you're watching these in, but I will see you in the next one.